So just for the first presentation, you mentioned an accessibility scanning tool. I kind of caught it slightly. It was SiteMOS or some?
Yeah, it was SiteMOS.
How do you exactly spell it? I've tried every variation on
Site,
Google.
M-O-R-S-E. Like the inspector.
I was looking for moss as in like Rolling Stone doesn't gather anything.
Me too. So any questions for the panel as a whole?
Yeah, hi. It's James from University of London. So I seem to be the only one at the University of London that's really caring too much about all of this. And we faced a challenge this morning where our Director of Legal Services has basically responded to a number of stakeholders saying this legislation doesn't apply to us, therefore we don't really need to do anything about it. I just wondered if the panel had any views about how I might go about tackling some of this.
Can I take the chair's prerogative and answer that? My institution has actually been advised that we are not obliged to, we're not in scope because we are more than 50% not public funded, but we are doing it anyway because it is the right thing to do. And you know, perhaps you need to have a conversation with your colleague about their legal, their ethical and moral obligations, and also the general sort of usability. I mean, I just think, and I'm really pleased actually that we are taking what I think is a very principled stand on this one. And I think it could be very good PR for an institution.
And I think the challenge that we've had is that
The problem with this communication that's gone out has included those who are responsible for the VLE. So they have just translated that as, well, we're not going to do anything about this now. Please amend your further communications, is what I was told today. So it's a real challenge.
So, colleagues, what would you do?
I think there's the appeal that Fiona mentioned around, you know, it's the right thing to do, and I genuinely think most people really do get that and desperately want to support it, but they have an issue with time and what they're able to do given their current workload. I think I wouldn't like to use this, but I think there's another way where you could start to demonstrate the broader benefits that this would offer. So if we look at just something like the REF, you know, Research Excellence Framework, if you design your resources to have a maximum audience, surely they've got a better chance of having greater impact. So I think we could start talking a slightly more business-like language around this, and we could talk about student satisfaction, we could talk about people finding information on your website much more efficiently, which may have an impact on recruitment. So I think that you shouldn't need to use that, but that might tickle people in the right places.
I think the point about refs is a great one. I think there is also a case to be made for just this is a design quality issue. I would be really interested to know if your university thinks it's exempt from the Equalities Act as well.
Maybe ask them. Any other thoughts?
The only other thing I'd say is thinking about maybe going down the emotive route and actually getting a student or filming a student using it. Sometimes that can work with certain people.
Yeah.
I can understand though if something's got bumped up the priority list because they think there's a liability issue. The grasping hold of, or maybe there isn't, so we don't have to do it. Obviously, everyone's got hugely competitive budget priorities. But yeah, good luck.
Right, any other questions from the room? Surely.
Vicky Holmes from the University of Reading. I think what's come out very strongly from the talks today and all the conversations is that accessibility is everybody's issue and everybody's concern. Then also the problem is it kind of becomes nobody's concern as well. And what we're finding a little bit, we're swirling around as to who takes responsibility for doing certain things. So I know, Claire, you talked about sending out communications around hints around Microsoft using that. But I can think of my own institution. Is it me who should be doing that? Is it IT? Is it my HR department? How do you get people who generally agree that this is important, but to sort out this sort of ownership and work out who does what? Because I think there's a danger of things not happening because of that. Does that resonate with people? Or?
I think we've mentioned that we pulled together our working group to address some of that. So my responsibility at the university is very much teaching and learning focused, so it's with the academic staff. whereas the comms that come out from IT or whether it's from Rob's digital team are all slightly different, nuanced and focused, but actually when we start pulling them all together, it's that same set of resource. From a practical, we're firmly pushing on academic stuff. We know there seems to be that drive across professional services where we've maybe got some gaps where that also needs to happen too. I think we're going to have I think we need to identify some system owners, and I think we've got some challenges there, probably particularly around the intranet. I think that's going to be a really challenge for our university in identifying that there is a system owner in place because it's very devolved at the moment. But I think we have got a handle on it. I think we've all got that working group's actually working quite hard to make sure that people are taking responsibility, and that does seem to be happening. So.
Yeah, I'm relatively new to the organisation, so I haven't quite understood our committee structure, and I'm not sure I ever will. But there are a variety of subcommittees that I've discovered that seem to have a bit of a remit, and maybe they meet twice a year, and maybe they don't. And then there's the UX guys and our dev guys have gone full steam ahead with this amazing project for accessibility. I'm kind of interested to find out, is there a broadly accepted accessibility maturity framework or something like that, where you can look across all of your areas of work and all of your output and see where you're at? I've seen a few things when I Google it, but I don't think it's accepted. So I'd be really interested if anyone has any handle on that.
So would I. Yeah. Anybody know?
I think the Business Disability Forum have an accessibility standard that works across a number of things like recruitment. But I think I'm sure they would say it's beautifully accepted. I think that's probably the nearest we have, and I think it's something we're very strongly considering.
Yeah, I think that was one of the ones that I saw. There was digital accessibility maturity matrix. I think.
That's right. It takes you through about 10 kind of core frameworks for your institutional structure. So it would be a very holistic approach.
And there's that ISO that I started to look at as well, the new ISO. But yeah, I don't think we have I wouldn't say we have a particularly rigorous catch-all mechanism for making sure we're doing it right. We have a lot of good intentions, a lot of good practice. But yeah, I think that's something that we need to work on, definitely.
Sorry, I've got a question here.
So I think there's a bit of a queue now, so should we take one from the back first?
Yeah, thanks. It's Caroline from University of the Arts London. I was just curious to know how people are getting on with speaking to suppliers, the third-party suppliers, and what the reaction from third-party suppliers have been, and how they're progressing in the area of accessibility.
That was my favourite question as well, and so over to the panel.
I can't answer that. We're not involved in procurement. My colleague from IT is in the audience. I don't know whether she wants to chip in from the other panel.
Yeah, what I can say is what we've had is some very frank conversations with some of our suppliers, because I was actually going to ask exactly the same question. I was going to ask the same question, see what other universities were doing, because I've had in very recent days some very frank conversations with some of our suppliers. The bottom line is some of them believe that they don't need to meet the requirements because they're a commercial organisation. You then have to explain to them that that means you can no longer do business with them and that you need to go into a tendering process, and they suddenly have a change of heart and want to start working with you. But I think the bottom line is going to be, as an educational sector, as a group of organisations, we're going to have to gang up on our suppliers and tell them to get it sorted, especially around stuff like our student systems, because most of us are using ones that are probably 10 years old and there's nothing new to market. It's not like the VLEs where, to be honest, companies like Blackboard, they've got their act together.
Can I perhaps come in with a solution here? Not so much an answer to the question, but Fiona and I have been talking about this already, and we're going to be having at ucisa a supplier day in January. This is largely my attempt to lay down the gauntlet to some of our suppliers around upping their game when they're exhibiting at things like our conferences and providing a more immersive and interactive experience for our delegates. However, we are going to use that about how to do business with us, and we're going to have one of the sessions with a particular emphasis on this particular thing, on accessibility. accessibility. So it isn't until January, because it's going to take us till then to pull everybody together, but we are listening at ucisa and we are responding. So we will be, and we'll have quite a few CIOs in that room making the point to our suppliers. So hopefully some of that collective voice will be heard. So I hope that's helpful.
I think Ben, you wanted to respond also?
Just around the thing about standardising a response, one of the issues we have is where people, either they don't really know what they're talking about, or they'll give you some guff about we're aspiring to be accessible, and it doesn't really mean anything. You know, where are you right now? Are you going to be compliant or not? Something George has been working on is that if people are familiar with the data security cyber essentials model, wouldn't it be very sensible to have... Sorry? Oh, sorry, I've stolen his thunder. But a similar kind of charter mark for accessibility, so we all know exactly where we are and we're getting the same measure, because you could talk to one company in the morning, another company in the afternoon, and they'll give you a different perception of what their accessibility is based on their own lack of understanding or possibly a bit more creativity, you know. So I think a core standard that if we were all asking consistent questions, and then we're able to kind of create some benchmarks around what accessibility actually means. I mean, nuts and bolts of it are you AA compliant or not, and can you prove it? But very few of them are equipped to be able to do that, in my experience.
So, Joe Lusignani from Cranfield. Just a comment from our colleague from Reading. We always have an executive sponsor for all our major initiatives, so that makes sure we get buy-in right across the organisation. I know it's probably a very simple statement, but that seems to work very well. And obviously, then you have your project governance underneath that.
Thank you.
Oh, hi. So Max from Bristol University. We've just got a question about intranets. We're focusing a lot on intranets at University of Bristol. We're using a lot of the Microsoft tech to do so. On the sort of government standard website, it says that if you create a new public sector website on or after the 23rd of September 2018, then all of these rules apply to you. Where we're having some problems is that I think a lot of our people are saying, well, you're creating an intranet, it's internal access only, even though it's access to students, because it's internal access only, these rules don't apply. So do we have some clarity on whether they do apply to internal sites? You know, is that, do we need to worry about them or not, I guess?
Well, I think, Richard is still here at the back, but I mean, am I right in saying that they are still absolutely part of it, because it's what you have, you know, it's what your institution is providing, and therefore you've commissioned it or paid for it, and therefore you're responsible for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Intranets, extranets are included. I think I gave the details on the slides about the dates where things are relevant for that, but definitely intranets are included. Yeah.
So the question there was, is there any guidance on WordPress sites and things that academics have created? I mean, my understanding is that they're academics, they are employees of the university, it's done under their sort of university persona, and therefore all of that would be in scope. I'm good at policing it. Is my mind not working? I'm obviously pointing in the wrong direction. Yeah, so I think the thing about sort of individual blog sites that are run by academics, they are still members of your university, and therefore they are, and you are bound by the same regulations. I suspect, though, that GDS1 monitoring might be a bit more lenient about sort of an individual's blog than they would be about the main institutional website. Does that feel about right? Or maybe not. This is slightly classic.
Excellent answer to that. You might say that I couldn't possibly comment. Maybe she'll find out on Monday.
I have one observation that probably leads to one or two questions. So the observation is, how can we put pressure on our suppliers? Well, we have centralised buying for a number of things. So we have, I think I've got the right name, AUPC for Scotland, or something similar, who are just actually in the process of doing a new tender, centralised buying tender for VLEs. And a lot of us use SUPC, but the main one, as a recommendation, is that I'm sure everyone uses G-Cloud. Now, I would imagine that whoever organises G-Cloud, and maybe I need to ask my poor chap from GDS up there, but basically if it's on G-Cloud, they're going to have to be compliant, so there must be some terms and conditions in the tender I'm sure we could use, and I wonder if they're available for sharing. So it's questions stroke answers.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, George Rhodes, independent consultant on this at the moment. I'm just changing roles, but I was going to mention this in a minute when me and Ben talk about some of the other stuff we've been doing. But this sort of all feeds into what Ben was trying to say, but I stopped him just a second ago about the Cyber Essentials scheme. So the guys that run G-Cloud are Crown Commercial Services, CCS. They have quite a number of different frameworks that you can buy off, not just G-Cloud. I think when I looked, there's about 27 that might serve digital services. I've got outstanding questions with Crown Commercial Services for what exactly they asked all of the suppliers in all of those frameworks, and I'll be sharing that publicly when and if I ever get an actual answer from them, because it's been more than a month now. The point is, because when I was still working for KCC, we had members of staff going to Crown Commercial Services because they were planning to buy products from suppliers, and we were asking, is it accessible? It should be. It should have been checked through these frameworks. The answer was no, it wasn't accessible, and through the framework we were buying through from CCS, what they had asked of suppliers was for them to self-certify about their own accessibility compliance, which means nothing pretty much, because they all say, oh yes, we're completely compliant, and then often are not actually anywhere near. So we've got a bit of a problem at the moment where I can't trust frameworks. They don't seem to be doing the role that they're meant for me at the moment, which is to stop us all having to independently audit every supplier we look at and wasting loads and loads of time, especially for these large suppliers. You know, we're not all going to complete a WCAG audit on Moodle just to make sure that we're happy when all of us are doing the same thing. You know, that's madness. That's such a duplication of effort. What it would be nice to see, and what Ben was going to say, is something like the Cyber Essentials scheme. You know, I put this to GDS a couple of weeks ago. Why don't we do like an accessibility essentials scheme, make it a little bit easier for them to badge themselves up, show that they're meeting these standard levels of compliance, and try and relieve some of that workload off of the frameworks, because I don't think they're being lax intentionally. I think the problem is there are so many suppliers trying to get onto the frameworks now, it's impossible to actually get through all of them and complete the due diligence that they need to. Sorry.
I was going to ask a question around sort of commercial procurement as well, but it's already been asked a couple of times now. We've taken a turn in that direction, and I realise that we're hurtling towards the break, so I'm going to skip on the question I was going to ask.
Adam Opras from the University of Cambridge. Just a very quick question about if anybody is considering web editing backends, Moodle backend, WordPress backend, that kind of stuff, whether they need to be accessible if we're providing, for example, WordPress as a service for academics and departments?
We certainly try and make sure that the internally facing systems work by the same global experience language which incorporates that. How well we accomplish that, I couldn't honestly tell you, but that's certainly the intention.
It's a good point, and in all honesty, no. I think it's a valid point, and I'll make it known.
One thing we're going to think about is accessibility training, awareness for our in-house developers who are developing systems. And I think that, you know, we've got, as well as putting pressure on external suppliers, we've got to make sure that when we create stuff that it is accessible. And I did see, I think, a bit of a conversation about this, and there may be some training available. I think it was mentioned on the accessibility regulations just mailed list recently. So I've got at least one colleague going along to find out, get some training. But I think it's quite an important thing for us to upskill our IT staff. Any more questions from the floor? I can't really see them here.
Thanks. Just really hoping for maybe just 2 bits of top-line advice on one, what bit would be the top advice to actually starting an audit of your web presence, and how would you oversee a devolved publishing system when you've got so many different publishers? So, yeah, top advice on actually starting an audit and overseeing a massive devolved publishing climate.
I'll jump in on that one. I was thankfully in a completely different sector when we did our job, so I don't know how we went about it necessarily. I do know that we employed a couple of students and we gave them a phone number, and there was a lot of legwork. Getting a partner who can help you with it, I'd certainly recommend. There's a number of people who offer it. We work with Little Forest, they've been great, but I know there's others who do very similar jobs. The key thing for us was tracking down ownership. That was the single biggest thing that we didn't know about. We literally hundreds of websites where no one knew who they were for, or why they existed, or how long they'd been there. And we've managed to get that tracked now to an extent. Now it's about building up the kind of the tapestry communication between them. As to the other point, was this really what was the second point?
So the 2 bits of advice I was looking for was to start an audit and to oversee a devolved publishing climate.
Dissolved publishing of websites.
So yeah, so like we've got thousands of web publishers.
Yeah. So we are in a situation where it is a bit of a Wild West, and where there are dozens of versions of WordPress and dozens of versions of Drupal and all kinds of things in between. Our ambition is to get to a point where we don't have that. Our idea is that we're going to build a central provision of a kind of a web publishing as a platform where we can spin up sites, where we'll maintain a common base for the things that we all kind of agree that ought to be centralised. I have to be really careful about centralised because it gets people's hackles up. Harmonised, we'll say, across the university, and stuff like accessibility, stuff like GDPR, InfoSec is that kind of really obvious layer. But then you kind of build onto it. What are your kind of user experience standards? What's your information architecture like? What's your look and feel? How do you express your brand? How do you create variation within the brand? And we're seeing a future where we have these base layers that are common across everything, but then we have flexibility on top of that. So you can build sites out of these modules that can tell the stories and have the flexibility that's required. And if you need really specialist stuff, if you need to integrate with a particular database, you can build out on top of that, but you still maintain the same common code base and the same common set of standards. That obviously requires a lot of communication. It requires really good communities of practice, and that's the future. That's the future state we want to get to. How we get over there is what we're trying to figure out at the moment. I think it's simple, like from a simplistic point of view, it's a mixture of carrot and stick. It's a point of making the service we offer awesome, and the obvious, simple, cheap choice, and creating like a vibrant community around that, which can direct the continual development of that platform and make sure that is the most suitable possible thing for the whole community. That means getting representatives in from all the business areas and making sure that their user stories are represented and shouted for. And then at the other end of that, it's the stick end, I guess. It's how do you make sure that your policies have teeth and will be listened to? And we don't really know how to do that ourselves yet. We're kicking around an idea at the moment, which is around anybody who's using university IT equipment signs up to the IT use policy. That in turn describes a number of other policies that you need to adhere to. Is there some way that we can say, yes, it's fine, you can go off and build your own website and do what you want, but if you're going outside of our set of standards that we've got commonly agreed, then you need to sign off from your head of college explaining why you're exposing the university to this additional risk and so on. So it's not about bashing people into it, but it's about making them really justify why they would go outside of, a cohort of a couple hundred professionals for whom this is a full-time job. That's how we think we want to move people towards that. But yeah.
Anybody want to add to that? I think that will have to be the last question for the panel.
We take a bit, well, from a teaching and learning perspective, we've got WordPress installed. So I manage, enable academics and students to give them that WordPress space to use. We've taken a brutal approach recently. We've emailed them a couple of times to say things are changing. If they haven't replied by the date, we're archiving it. And then they'll soon be in touch if it's still used. There's lots of these little things that we've spoken about that get created and spun up because they want to create an internal journal or some sort of publishing site, or there's little odds and ends. Yeah, and they're not always maintained, so yeah, brutal approach, we've archived them and I'm sure they'll be in touch if they want them back. There is a bigger challenge for us from a teaching and learning perspective, is we do get a lot of student-led projects. They're creating WordPress sites, there's a lot of staff ones. Recently our College of Arts have come up with an idea they'd like to create like a media publication site where they want to just showcase some of the work that students, they want it to be co-created space, so the staff are leading on it, the students will take over the management. How do we manage that in that new area? They want to create that next week. You know, that's just a big question mark. We've got a bit of a template for them. Why do they want to comply with GDPR, comply with accessibility legislation? Sent that form out. The next question I'm going to get back is who's going to, yes please, but who's going to train us? And that's one of the biggest areas I'm still grappling with all this web space for teaching and learning, for all the assessments our students are doing, for the blogging, for those creative assessment types. I think I'd like JISC and GDS to help us navigate that arena as well.
And maybe ucisa.
Yeah,
I mean, we do actually, somebody mentioned about, don't call it accessibility training, but actually we have a course called Creating Accessible Content. It's super, super popular, so, you know, it's highly if they're not. Right, I think we need to stop because we need to